created by humans or AI?
Yeah, that's
the
a whole other issue, too. We did a survey, the students in one of my classes did a survey on where are you getting your information about the election. And they had a series, and they asked them by form, newspaper, TV, blah, blah, social media. And, of course, it's students. It's all social media. But that's not enough. What's on the social media? It could be, is it from a news source? Is it just some random guy? Is it your father? I mean,
in my position, I come across dozens and dozens and dozens of entities online that claim to be newspapers, but aren't. They were created by someone in somewhere in some bedroom somewhere because they know the clicks will generate money. And all they do is they have AI aggregate keywords because they don't want to plagiarize, because now there are some tools to stop plagiarism, that creates stories but based on algorithms. So it's not real news, it's a pretend news. But when they know that you're interested in Beyonce, and you'll go down the rabbit hole in Beyonce and find out she suddenly has 16 children and she's lives in a hovel with 20,000 cats, but it's just the algorithm. Everybody likes cat videos, so therefore there's got to be a cat in there somewhere, and it's got to be, but it's not. None of it is true. Now I find some of our faculty high visible faculty will suddenly have their names in these entities that I know for a fact they never talk to, but they're quoting them, and I'm like, that's kind of a generic quote that anybody could say, but they're attributing it to a faculty member, but it's not a real news organization. They don't have real reporters. They don't have bylines. They don't have a click on the byline and it'll take you to, let's learn about Melissa Wall. She's a reporter. No, there's none of that stuff. And so if you're getting it off of the internet and social media, but what are you getting?
What are you getting, and who created it, and for what reason?
Yeah.
Because there are the bad actors who are trying to create propaganda, but there's also a lot of people, and I looked at this during COVID. It's a grift. It's just a grift. I just want to make money. Okay, I'll just put this out here. I don't care if it's true or not. So there's a whole bunch of grifters also in the mix. So you have all these people. Sometimes it's state actors trying to distribute information. What was interesting to me in a class, where we had a class for students, I said, okay, make an AI news anchor. Students made an AI news anchor.
Yeah.
The students were like, well, if I had, of course you have to have more money to create a really good one. But the students said, everybody would know this isn't real, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, it's on your phone, and they're looking at it for 5 seconds. They're not going to know that person sounds funny, or their eyes aren't quite right, or they're just looking at it and say, I saw a newscaster, and they said da-da-da-da-da. That's where you're going to see it, is on the phone, a quick little video clip saying God knows what.
They become so commonplace, whether it's on YouTube or especially TikTok, where it is this like short form. People are kind of like, all right, whatever. I'll watch this robotic voice talk about it, whether or not it's true.
They're very popular in Asia, and particularly in India.
I remember you had shown us the one. I think it came from an Indian news channel, and it was like, I think we kind of struggled to decipher whether it was real or not.
They had one who interviewed their prime minister. I mean, they have AI did it.
I have a question, because we have a budding journalist here. What lies in the future? Now, I'm a weird person, and I subscribe to 12, as I give a lecture to my students on a regular basis that they have to read. They hear it quite repeatedly from me. And he'll nod. That they have to expose themselves to a variety of sources. So I'm not just reading on one side or the other. I actually do read and subscribe to The Telegraph in England, which is not a liberal publication. Far from it. Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, it's also not a liberal publication. Far from it. But by balancing out, and they're all trained journalists, one has to remember The Telegraph actually exposed the sexual exploitation of children by the church in Great Britain. So you have to understand there's still journalists at the bottom of everything. They're still trained journalists, and they still ask uncomfortable questions, even if they work for the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch. They're still asking uncomfortable questions. But I'm old. I grew up asking for Christmases to a subscription to the LA Times. I was weird. What does this generation learn? I do see the rise of things like ProPublica, but it's nonprofit. It's not a dedicated citizen who cares about its community. As much as we may have had a problem with William Randolph Hearst, and he may have started a war or not, his newspapers were to serve the community at the end of the day. The Chandlers, no relation at all, but they still felt invested in their community. They don't exist anymore. I take back, the Lozanos still own the La Opinion, but most of you don't read Spanish, and I do read La Opinion. Where does the future lie for him? Your students. What is the future of journalism?
Well,
I know it's a hard question.
it's not going to be. I think what has existed is sunsetting. I do, and we just focused on this in the fall in one of my classes on the nonprofit, whether it's LAist, whether it's NPR, whether it's got some state funding, or whether it's from some other kind of nonprofit like ProPublica, the Philadelphia Inquirer. If you read their op-eds, because they're owned by a nonprofit, they're very hard-hitting. They are not pulling their punches. So I've emphasized that and kind of, that's a route to go in terms of looking for a place to work. You're not going to make a lot of money. It's almost like it's going to become a craft, like what we tell our art students, that you're not going to make a lot of money. So you may have to have some secondary work, because these institutional positions are drying up, and the ones that exist, I'm very worried about what you might be asked to do. And I think that's a huge concern. So nonprofits, some of them small. We had a little exercise in class. I made them go through News Match, where you donate money, and I said, pick two and I'll give money. You pick the two best ones. And so they had to go through and look at it. And I try to talk about nonprofit ownership and what that means, and the kind of the pros and cons, and can you trust them, and all of the other issues. You can make money as a content creator, but there's all kinds of pitfalls, and I think this lack of institutional support is one of the big ones. Where are you going to get your health care?
Where are you going to get your lawyer?
Where are you going to get your lawyer? Are you on your own doing it? Are you in a collective? I don't see a lot of them working in a collective, which to me, working in community with other journalists it was both one of the fun things as a reporter, but also one of the things that gave you the strength to stand up to people, because you were all kind of together, and you knew that your journalist friends were going to back you up.
And you also knew they also helped you ask the right questions.
Yeah, and they would call each other out, they would tell you, and there'd be, I remember one paper I worked with, there would be this critique, and they'd be like, oh, look at this one, and they would internal, and people would debate whether the person, so I think working in community with other journalists, or whatever you are. Look at the this new app that suddenly sprung into our lives, Watch Duty. It is an amazing example of something that, came together, and you can trust it. They're pulling from public sources. It's highly focused on something important that you need to know. So those kinds of opportunities are out there. So I think it's a matter of rethinking what we think of as a journalism job. What would that be? I just think the fact that many outlets are dying is going to continue. We know, too, that it's been newspapers, and newspapers were the places that hired the most people. They had more staff. They had more reporters. But I think television will eventually have its own day as well, and I think that AI is going to eliminate a lot of jobs.
Well, going back to the whole TV thing, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but especially with the presidential debates, like, people are even like, man, who needs them? And maybe that's just because since Donald Trump has gotten elected, they've just been like more inflammatory, chaotic, whether you want to talk about his debate with Hillary Clinton to his debate with Kamala Harris. They've just, is that going to disappear?
Well, I think it was quite clear that Kamala Harris kicked his And he didn't like that, and that's why they kind of diminished it. And I think they cooked up some other story for us to chase after.
Oh no, yeah, they didn't even have the full. So usually there's three debates
because everybody said she won, and then that story just kind of disappeared.
It's funny because then he said, I think she offered, hey, let's debate again, and then he was like, you only want to debate because you lost. He's got his ways to be, claim victory. I was actually another time I was watching, was it that movie The Apprentice last, just like I didn't finish it, but it really gives some insight to the way he thinks, because he trained under Roy Cohn, the prosecutor, and one of the things he's saying, like, never admit defeat. That was like, I mean, that's like, they say it in the trailer, I think, for that movie, but it's very interesting to see, like, oh, okay, this is where he gets it, but...
Well, I think the debates exist for low-information voters.
Sure, yeah, it's supposed to be...
Everybody else knows, but most people don't, because they're not paying attention and they don't know what anybody stands for.
It's supposed to sway the moderates, because if you're liberal, you're going to vote for Kamala. If you're Republican,
But
Trump,
if it's not done properly, it's not done with some kind of institutional group that's known to play fair, then it doesn't serve any purpose. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. And, assuming we have a new election.
I know, someone was saying, like, give him a third term or something like that.
He said within the last 24 or 48 hours, something about that. But he's talked about having another term.
Yeah, well, that's the Tennessee legislature state legislature, but congressman who is pushing that. But it's quite interesting is the lack of listening to the information. Yes, the comedians are driving a lot of the dialogue at them more, and they're doing these man on the streets, and they come armed with facts. And you hate me because I'm a conservative and I voted for Trump. And no, actually, I don't hate you. What I hate is the actions you have taken, because they jeopardize the people you love. Well, that's not what I did. And they'll go into a deep dive. We'll go, okay, I'm going to hear why. Well, he said this and this, but do you actually know what this means? Well, it's like tariffs.
Yeah. And
now you have a comedian carting around someone who specializes in import-export and having to explain to the subject what a tariff means. What tariff means is just another word for tax, and they're going to pay the tax. Well, actually, no. That's a cost I, the American importer, are going to incur, and I don't have the ability to absorb this 40% increase, so I'm going to pass it on to my consumer because I have no choice. That's not what it means. That's not what Trump said. But I'm telling you because I'm the importer, and this is what I do. I don't care what he says. This is the reality of it. And they'll go in a circle saying, but that's not what he said it means. He goes, I don't care what he said it means. I can show you. Here are my books. And then it's like, but it takes a good 10 minutes of going around in a circle before someone goes, that's 10 minutes. You can't do that to every individual in the country.
It's reminding me, I thought recently of it was a study they did in Britain, and it was about international news, and they were trying to get these people from a range of backgrounds, their comments on some kind of news story about a famine in Africa or something, and the people said, the way this is reported, this BBC, they're not talking to me. I don't understand. They think I understand, or I have all this backstory. So all they're doing is telling you this bit, but you have to know the backstory. Mm. And so I don't care about it. And so once they were educated about it, then they said, I understand now, and yeah, I think this is a good idea or whatever. And I think this is what the comedian's role is they're trying to give some of the backstory, but without making people feel stupid because they don't know. Because there's some kind of weird thing where people think they're making fun of me for being dumb or whatever. Maybe people are. But to give how do you give the backstory? There's the matter of time, but also in a way that people aren't resentful of the backstory. And I think humor is a way to do it.
So they don't feel like they're being talked down to, essentially.
Because they're making fun of everybody. Because the comedian will also make fun of the Democrats and their stupid things that they do as well. But what gets me about all of this, and I've lived all across this country, I grew up across this country. And what gets me is we complain a lot about the American educational system, but it's actually really pretty good. There are certain states that are the exception, but for the most part, because we have been saying for a number of years, decades, that the true step to the American dream is to get a college education. That is going to open a lot of doors and open the doors to certain sets of, to the middle class for you. So you're never staying down in the working poor. We have a good educational system. Why isn't anybody They spent kindergarten to 12th grade in a system as a whole. Really isn't that bad. But what happens after high school graduation? You get the diploma and all those things just go out the window. They have a good foundation for understanding what is being presented to them.
Well, I think the testing, constantly testing people, teaches you the wrong things. It teaches you memorization and to remember these things. And then you don't remember. We know the studies show you don't remember after you have that kind of test. It's not training you to work on projects and to investigate and to create things. Those are two different ways of thinking and educating. And we don't have enough media literacy. And when it's taught, it's often not... It's taught, well, there's this side and there's that side, and it's like, no, this isn't what we're after here. How do you know what's true and what's not true? Not what's their opinion. To me, that's not as important as, is this true or not? And we don't do a good job with media literacy. If you look at someplace, I like to show this video to students. It's in Finland, and they have this amazing media literacy program, and then they get to the part where they say, well, who helped set this up? And they said, oh, some American professors came over. They said they couldn't get anybody to do it in their home country, so they brought it over here. So yeah, we have the ability to do it. It's just, do we want to do it? And I think there are elements who don't want people to get that media literacy. I think there's a push against education, against educational systems. They just want people to learn to obey and not to question.
As a journalism professor at a public university, that's a comprehensive university, how do you get your students to act on what you're trying to teach them? They don't have to necessarily go into journalism, but you've had them where you can help deprogram them. And how do you get them to then share the knowledge? Because we've constantly been told that knowledge is power. And it's true. I mean, God, it is so true. I don't care if you're in the Philippines. I don't care if you're in the Congo. I don't care if you're in Finland. Knowledge is power, and it is empowering. It can lift you up. How do you get your students to share that wealth of empowerment?
Well, part of it is for students, a lot of students, I think, is having the confidence to share. And so there's a lot, I'm very oriented towards discussion and like in my international news class, and it's an online class, I'm like spending time, what happened internationally today? And then asking them questions. Well, how did this happen? What does this mean? How did you find this out? Da, 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 da. And so getting people to feel confident that they can talk about the ideas that they've learned, because a lot of people are not confident in that way. But also trying to get students, when possible, when you don't have too many of them, is to work on projects. Because I think taking tests, they're good for helping people to remember things, but at the end of the day, that doesn't stick with them. Oh, I took a test 4 years ago. But 4 years ago I had to go out and do this thing that was difficult or made me uncomfortable or was a big project. I mean, we have a student right now who's working on a project about how do you cover the homeless situation. And he's actually going to create like a zine or a booklet for students on how do you cover the homeless as a student reporter. And that, to me, is how you're sharing the knowledge. Is he's gone out and he's done it, and now it's going to be from his point of view as a student. This is an important topic. It's huge here in LA.
It's growing.
And it's complicated, and how do you not misrepresent? How do you give a voice to those people? How do you keep yourself safe? What are all the issues? And he's going to get this from other students and from his own perspective and create something that can be distributed not just to our students, but to any student who wants to go out and cover this topic. So trying to help students figure out ways to package what they've done into something. I'm very big on this in the master's program of who's the audience and how are you going to get it to them? How are you going to distribute it to them? And you have to do that. That is part of your role, your responsibility. Not, I'm going to turn it into the professor, but you got to give it to the public. And it's got to be something accurate and that you've created with responsibility to the public and that you're proud of. And if it's all those things, then you got to get it out there. You also have the additional responsibility of not just to pick up an A in the class, but to get it out there.
I'd like to thank my co-host, Carmen, Ramos, Chandler, for joining me on this episode. And most importantly, I would like to thank Dr. Melissa Wall for joining us for this very invigorating and eye-opening discussion. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Well, thank you.
You can find episodes of Diving into the Discourse and CSUN Conversations on the CSUN Conversations website page, as well as watch them on YouTube. You can also listen to them on Spotify and Apple Music. Thank you for watching.